Talking about Vladimir Lenin's government, his rule in the Soviet Union, and we said that when he gets control of government, he is going to set up a system called the New Economic Policy. Remember, he'd promised three things: peace, land, and bread. He helps get the newly formed Soviet Union out of the war, out of World War One. He provides land to the peasants, the former serfs, who have only been for like 50, 60 years at this point. And now he says we're going to provide bread for the country. The new economic policy, remember, that allows farmers to be able to grow as much as they can on their particular piece of land, and it incentivizes them to grow more by saying, listen, the government's going to take half, but you can sell the rest on the open market. Lenin understood that the government needed to produce in order to fulfill their promise of being able to feed people. And so the government's taking that, but they allow the peasants to sell whatever. And a group forms, wealthier peasants were referred to as kulaks, individuals who did not want to, or excuse me, who were very judicious in how they approached their farming and were able to have more success economically than they'd ever had previously. And so the new economic policy is starting to increase agricultural production. The government's going to start distributing food to the people in a true communist type of fashion here. And so the new economic policy is something that is going to benefit most of the peasants. Now, you have to understand, too, though, that even though the peasants are starting to get something here, it's still a pretty difficult existence for them. It's lots of hard work. It's not something that is easily done. And for them to gain, you had the aristocrats, the people who were part of the former bourgeoisie, who have lost their land. Their place is definitely not a good one at the moment. And you have to remember, too, that Vladimir Lenin, while it sounds like he might be doing something in a positive fashion, people who don't go along with Lenin's government find themselves the victims of violence. They're also political prisoners, false imprisonments, and in some instances, if you're not going along with the system, many people are put to death. So don't go thinking that Vladimir Lenin is a nice, good guy, because he's not. But just like all leaders, Vladimir Lenin here is going to die. And the communist government, the Soviet Union, so reveres Vladimir Lenin that this is his body, still entombed and preserved, and you can go visit it today. It's on display. Lenin is the revered creator of the Soviet Union. He's putting the Marxist policies into place, and they will be able to forever look upon him. Yes, it's like taxidermy. You want to keep your cat around after it dies, you can have it stuffed. Instead of having your cat stuffed, the Soviet Union decided to have Vladimir Lenin stuffed. It's on display still, and every few years, some experts have to go in and work on the embalming to make sure he stays in a particularly, shall we say, pleasant-looking condition. So Lenin's dead, and when Lenin's dead, there are two other fairly popular figures who want to take his place. Those two individuals are Leon Trotsky and Joseph Stalin. And you have to realize that both of them have their own popularity within the party, and they've got their supporters, and these are the two likely candidates to gain power. And to make a very long story short, Joseph Stalin's going to do some clever political maneuvering. He makes promises to other individuals to get their support and support the people who support those individuals to back him as the next leader of the Communist Party, which subsequently would mean he's running the country. He is the head of the dictatorship of the proletariat. He's going to be in charge of the people. Now, ironically, Trotsky is probably more popular with the common people. His ideas about socialism probably mirror Vladimir Lenin's a little more closely. And Lenin, had he been able to pick his successor, handpick his successor, he probably would have picked Trotsky. But things don't go the way you planned. Lenin knew that Stalin was a dangerous individual. And we'll get to that here in a second. But Joseph Stalin is going to become the next leader of the Soviet Union. Lenin dies in 1924, and Stalin organizes his supporters to pick him as the next head of the Communist Party. And they don't know what kind of mistake they're making. Because Trotsky was so popular, Stalin saw him as a threat, and they expelled Trotsky from the country, and later on they'll have him assassinated while he was living in exile in Mexico. They tried on a couple of occasions, but they finally got the job done. Now, when Joseph Stalin becomes leader of the Soviet Union, he's going to make a radical change to what they were doing. That new economic policy and some of the things that Lenin had done were going to go out the window. One of the first things that Stalin does is he promotes an idea called socialism in one country. Now, Lenin had thought that the Soviet Union should be encouraging the workers in other countries to revolt and start the worldwide revolution that they all wanted. However, Stalin says, no, no, no. Socialism in one country, meaning we build up socialism here in the Soviet Union and we provide the great shining example that we need. And in order to have socialism in one country, Stalin said we must industrialize. This whole thing about helping the peasants, the farmers, that sounds all well and good, but what we need is to industrialize. Stalin tells the Communist Party leaders that we're about 50 years behind other modern countries like the United States and Western Europe. And he said, if we don't do this, the Soviet Union, our communist government, is going to fail. And you see here, this is a kind of a propaganda poster saying, give us industrialization, meaning that we have to start getting machines and factories together to boost our economy. And it's not just the peasants out there in the farms that need help. Now, you see right here, the idea getting the people behind the industrialization was going to be key. This right here translates to high rates of industrialization make the Soviet Union an independent state, meaning that if we industrialize, we have our own factories, we can produce our own things here, then we won't have to rely on international trade and other countries, especially those capitalist countries. Okay? Now, Stalin's socialism in one country is going to, the industrialization is going to be, it sounds like a good idea in some ways, but in some ways it's going to be really bad. Now, take a look at this. Once they start industrializing, they're going to make some significant gains. From 1913 to 1940, you're going to see the development, the production of three key resources here: pig iron, the iron ore that they get out of the ground, steel, which they manufacture from the iron, and coal, which of course you need for a number of things. It's a heating source. You need the byproduct from coal to help produce steel. And you look at the output of various countries, and all of them are making, well, I shouldn't say all of them, but most of them are making some gains. But if you look at what Russia does, from 1913 to 1940, they triple their iron production. They more than triple their steel production. And their coal production, the amount of coal they're getting out of the ground, is multiplied by a factor of 5. So this industrialization plan, the warp speed that Joseph Stalin says we're going to take Russia from this mainly agricultural, peasant-driven society to an industrialized society, we're going to go at a warp speed, and it's working. And the results are there, but it's going to be an ugly way to get to the results. Okay? Here's what Stalin does immediately. He says, listen, we have to industrialize, and those farmers have it too good out there. They're working on that new economic policy where they get to sell a lot of stuff on the open market, and you know what? We're going to change what we do. Communism under Joseph Stalin, they're going to take just about everything from the farmers. They leave them with just enough for subsistence, meaning to feed the people on their farm, to feed their families. They're taking just about everything. No more selling stuff on the open market. He particularly was not pleased with ththose kulaks, and many of those farmers resented Joseph Stalin for what he did. Stalin said, listen, if we're going to industrialize and we have these factories and cities, we've got to be able to feed people. And we're going to need more grain, more of other crops, things that we need to feed people in the cities with. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what happens to the amount of agricultural production when farmers no longer have incentive to grow more. When they know if the government's going to take just about all of it anyway, agricultural output is going to decrease once the new economic policy is taken away and once Stalin has put in his plan here. Now, what's really disappointing or scary at the same time is Stalin accidentally triggers a mass famine in his own country. Because they're not producing as much food, people are starving to death. And that's where the Soviet Union is in the immediate years of Stalin's rule. Now, we'll tell you more about that in the next video.